Anyway, okay, so I'm going to get started now, and I wanted to say to everybody who has joined us, welcome so much. My name is Jamie Lynn, and I am the president-elect of the San Diego chapter of the Special Libraries Association. So today we're talking to my friend Tim, and Tim received his MLIS from the UCLA Graduate School of Education and Information Studies and his Master's of Divinity from Harvard University. Um, um, and his interests in technology, librarianship, and silence have led him to some very unique experiences. For instance, he is now joining us from Rome today, where it's evening in Rome, correct? If you can tell us, Tim, what are you doing in Rome?
Thank you, Jamie. So I am here for the summer, and I should say too, just for a little dramatic effect, I'm noticing I'm outside now, and I'm noticing some clouds rolling in, and I heard some thunder, so we might get a little extra drama with some rain behind us. So a little Rome drama here. But my work here this summer is I'm working with a colleague at a news service called EWTN at the Vatican, and we're doing work in 360 videos, VR, and also some social media work as well. I'm doing some sound art projects related to church bells in Rome and pumping that through some of the social media channels that they have there. So it's a kind of a combination of production, but also some travel too. We're going to be going to Dublin to film a conference there at the end of August. And yeah, so it's mostly a production side, but there's also some interesting work in terms of social media and the sort of forward-facing way they push out content in terms of not just the traditional channels of a news service on their website and writing articles, but also looking for new platforms and new ways to distribute the content that they generate there, like VR, like the written word, like sound recordings.
Are things uploaded to the internet right now, or is it available for people to look at, or is it something that's at the end of the summer it'll be sort of batch uploaded?
Yeah, all the pieces are in production. There are a couple social media feeds that are new, but they've produced a few things that probably I would say I can leave links to everybody afterwards if they want to look at the Instagram and Facebook accounts. But right now they're just getting underway.
Great. Yeah. So you and I met through SLA actually. Do you remember how the conference was in San Diego, and I went up to you and I said, hey, I saw you at a panel or something, and that was how we, I think, officially met. But then we also worked together at Qualcomm for a bit, and you were working specifically with data analytics while you were at Qualcomm. What was interesting to you about that kind of work?
Well, the analytics work for us was interesting, not just because it was in the library, but because we supported multiple teams. So we got to see analytics from multiple perspectives, from mobile, from the library, from learning. And it was interesting to see not just the kinds of services that are offered, but how they're measured and where the library profession sort of sits in the analytics world. And to think about how, there are tons of tools like Google Analytics, all kinds of web tools that are ready for analytics on the web, there's mobile platforms, there's social platforms, but these kinds of things don't really exist for library data. They do for individual platforms, but you run into, I think my colleagues can, who have looked at this space we can talk more and might agree that there's not a lot of metadata agreement across these different analytics data sets. So it was really interesting to see the comparison between where libraries are as an organization and as an institution in sitting next to either tech or IT or other places that have a little more of an infrastructure sort of built into the world. So I think the real challenge was to then bring library analytics into that space. How do they sit alongside a learning initiative or, a website or a mobile platform? You've got people who read articles, you've got people who access different resources, and how do you account for that? And that was the big push for us. And it was a wonderful challenge. And we, created an analytics dashboard that was accessible so folks could go and get real-time data. And so I've talked with a lot of folks folks who do library analytics, and I just found it to be an interesting space that certainly is ripe for more exploration. So I was glad to be sort of on the frontier for that.
Yeah, I was going to say it was sort of a pioneer project because this was 5 years ago or so, and I think nowadays it's a little bit more common. We definitely hear data analytics, and it's become like a hot job. But 5 years ago, it was definitely it was figuring out what it was, how we could use it, and I forget, was the dashboard, the custom dashboard, based on Tableau? Was that the?
It was ClickView.
Okay, but that wasn't based on Tableau. It was a proprietary.
Yeah, ClickView is sort of, it's similar to Tableau, but it was the tool that we were using at Qualcomm at the time.
Okay.
That was the tool that was supported. So they're very similar in a lot of ways.
And had you done similar or some sort of work like this beforehand? I know that before, maybe even before you got your library science degree, you were working, you had started a SEO company, internet SEO company. Do you want to talk about that at all?
Yeah. So, sure.
We're going way back now.
Yeah, we're going way back. So this was at the days when, of early internet search engines, Alta Vista, Lycos, InfoSeek, like all these dinosaurs that maybe some people out there remember. But that's when we were around. And the analytics came in because we were essentially, it was a small business, and we did hotel reservations online, and we got commissions for every sale. So it was very important to not only have a very good user experience, but we needed analytics because we were bidding for our search terms essentially in Google and in all these other search engines. So we needed to find the ROI. It was essential for our survival. And so analytics was very much a part of that. And at that point, it was a very rudimentary world. There wasn't a lot. There was hits, visits, time on site, that kind of thing. And then we had conversions, and that wasn't something even Google supported. We had to sort of jury rig all of that. But it was sort of a crash course in analytics and user experience before I even knew there was such a thing. Or, right around the time, I think when at University of Michigan and, the Polar Bear and the Polar Bear book and the information architecture scene started to kind of come on, was right around that time. So I hadn't heard of it until I got to library school, that there was actually this thing that I had been doing, but there was a whole supportive community and intellectual thought behind it, and a degree that would support it.
Wow, thank you. And so from there, or from your SEO company and then to Qualcomm doing data analytics, your next step was as a, user experience research librarian? So what does that mean, and what kind of projects were you working on as a user experience research librarian?
Yeah, that was, so between my SEO job and Qualcomm, I went to UCLA and got my MLIS and did user research and user experience there. And after Qualcomm, I went to Harvard Divinity School. And while I was there getting my master's, I worked in both the Divinity School Library and then the User Research Center of Harvard Library. And I started in the Divinity School Library doing user research projects. They were traditional usability projects for the website. There was also a place ethnographic study, and we did a number of different studies. And so the user research librarian was essentially somebody sitting in the library whose sole task was to do studies to learn about how the patrons are using your library and how we can improve systems and services.
So you were doing the studies.
I was developing and implementing the studies and doing from stem to stern, and then seeing their implementation, the sort of actionable findings. For example, if there was a change to the website that I thought should be made and we all agreed, then I would sort of help push that through and work with IT to make that happen.
And so what kind of library was this? Was it a traditional academic library?
It was, the Divinity School Library at Harvard, the Andover Harvard Theological Library, as an academic library that supported primarily graduate students, faculty, alumni, and visiting researchers, and other folks from the university who were using the library if they happened to be taking courses in the Divinity School.
Okay. And so this was a job that you had while you were a divinity student at Harvard. And there's some information here about a UX lab as well as your position at the library. So how does what are the collaborations between that UX lab and the library, and how did that all relate?
Yeah, great question. So Harvard happens to be blessed very recently with this user research center, the User Experience Lab, which supports not just Harvard libraries all across the campus, but really almost any initiative that wants to come and either get some support, use their lab, do some studies. There are multiple ways that this lab supports the university. And I happened to come in, I believe it was that year or the year after it was formed. And so all the studies that I mentioned, essentially, I consulted with them. It was really, really just a blessing to have it because for multiple reasons, the staff is fantastic. And to have somebody to collaborate with was really wonderful. But they also had the lab, resources, all kinds of testing equipment. They even had these special glasses that do eye tracking, which we used in multiple different studies for not just websites, but for place. So as people walk through a physical space, what are they looking at? Do they see the signage? Where does their visual attention go? So it was kind of like being a kid in a candy store. I mean, I loved user research, and then there's this place that has all the support for it. So I was just very, very pleased to support them. And then the person who led the lab, Amy Deshane, who I had worked with, she went on maternity leave. And because I had such a relationship with them and we had great collaborations, they asked if I would fill in while she was on maternity leave. And at that point, I got to see a whole different side of how user research is supported at an institution. So everything from the law library, the medical library, all these different places that had different sort of questions about their users and where to put their resources. So it was really fascinating. I got to support a lot of different initiatives, including Harvard Libraries just completely redesigned their website, and they're in the process of rolling out over time more and more changes. And I encourage folks to just take a look at it. It's a really really wonderful collaboration that they've had, and a fascinating look at where certain visions of libraries and can go, but also what that actual presentation online looks like. And they have some features that are really, really fascinating about, for example, if you want to find a study space, you can search this list, and it has multiple criteria, like, you're looking for a quiet space, do you want to eat, do you want to, do collaborative work, all these things, and then you'll see a bunch of options. So it was just really wonderful to be at the UX lab and to support all of these things. It was, again, like being a kid in a candy store.
So the new Harvard, so by the way, it wouldn't be a librarian webinar if a cat didn't make its appearance. That was Tessa, everybody. Hopefully she's gone now. So was the website designed then through several different user research studies, like researching, asking students what they wanted and things like that?
Yeah, it's an initiative that they have many studies that they consulted, but they also worked with a company that did both a lot of the UX and a lot of the actual design work, and they collaborated with Harvard Libraries. And the UX lab essentially had a history of user studies that they were able to go back and look at, and personas, all kinds of things that they leveraged, and then they would do some lean studies in between as they were doing design sprints. So there were many studies that went into it, both the kind that you just have a bunch of donuts and you track down students for just a quick survey, down to sitting down with visiting people, visiting researchers, faculty, and doing some longer form ethnographic work. There was lots and lots of work that was done during the design process, but also, again, they had a library of research going back.
The light is fading a little bit over in Rome. Is there any way you can move a little bit so we can see you out of the shadow a little bit?
I think I need to move. Yeah,
Oh, no.
So if you'll bear with me, I'll just move my camera here, but I can still hear you, so.
Okay. And everybody, this is Rome. We get a little tour of a house.
How's that?
That's great. Hi.
Although I may have lost your connection.
No, I can hear you. Can you still hear me?
Am I back?
Yeah, can you hear me? Uh-oh, this is what happens.
There we go.
Yay, okay, so excellent, we're back. Yes. So, okay, virtual reality, how does the virtual reality fit into the UX lab and the user experience research position, or what? I mean, I just know it happened during that time. Tell me a little bit about it.
So it was an interest that I had brought to the master's program, and part of the reason, part of the reason, can you hear me now?
Yes, you may need to move back to where you were because I think the internet connection was a little better there. Like I'd rather
Okay,
hear
okay.
you than see you. Not, I mean, I'd like to see you too, but if we had to choose one or the other, it'd probably be, um, yeah.
All right, there we are.
Yay. Okay. So I, unfortunately, right when you started talking about virtual reality, that's when it cut out. So I don't know how long you continued, but think of that as a practice run. So we were talking about, how and when did VR come into play in your role at Divinity School and at the library?
Yeah. So I had essentially gone to the master's program with this in mind. As part of the inspiration of being at Qualcomm was seeing all kinds of interesting projects, including looking at how VR was emerging potentially. And it was one of the reasons too to go to Cambridge because there was work being done at the MIT Media Lab and lots of, there's a community in Boston doing this kind of work. So I explored it in a number of ways, one of which was in the library doing essentially curation of VR experiences there. So I held open office hours and I essentially had a menu for folks like, here's 10 experiences and choose the one you like and sit down and enjoy the show. So we had a meditation app, we had an app that it was called there's multiple apps, but Notes on Blindness was a very popular one, and so there were lots of ways. There was, particularly in the Divinity School, there were experiences like walking the Hajj, in doing the circumambulation, and that's something that most folks don't ever get to see. But the New York Times actually was able to somehow do a piece on that, a 7-minute piece where you arrive in the city, you go through the town, and then you actually do the walk. And so it was these kinds of visceral experiences that were opportunities to bridge and connect a lot of the learning and the research and the sort of work that was being done in the Divinity School to actually put people in an experience of a lot of the things that they were looking at. So from archaeology down to all different disciplines, it was a really interesting way to connect people. So it was quite successful, and we did it both in the Divinity School library and also in the science library, which had had a recent renovation. We were curating VR experiences. And then aside from that, I also was lucky enough to take some courses at MIT in development and did some hackathons too and built some apps. So I got it from both the development side and also from the curation side, which there was a lot of excitement that was generated from that. And it has legs. There's now communities in Harvard and the Divinity School and elsewhere that are continuing this work.
So are the virtual reality experiences directly related to the Divinity School then? And so are the spaces more of these meditative space, or the experiences more meditative experiences than what you would think of when you think of like going into a VR like gaming sort of environment?
Yeah. So there were several kinds. I offered a number of different opportunities for people to experience VR. Most of them were things that I thought might be of interest. So some of the content that we talked about and that you mentioned, meditation, experience of ritual, of performance, of sacred rites, spiritual places, but also just dazzling VR experiences, like I said, like Notes on Blindness, which everybody gets captivated by some of these things. So just also I wanted to give them access to some of the emerging possibilities in the medium so that people could think about how they might not just be consumers, but actually producers of some of this content as it moves forward. Because there's a lot of opportunity, I think, not just for the kind of content that's out there and, it's entertainment and on down the line, but academia could certainly begin to start leveraging this content, and they are in a number of universities. So I just wanted to give a window into that.
I read in one of the articles that on your website that you became interested in something about you were interested in librarianship and silence, and that's pretty funny as it is. I think just the idea of librarians and silence. But can you talk a little bit about your interest in silence? I'm assuming it means something a little bit different than going around telling people to be quiet.
That's a great question. So looking back on not just the reason I mentioned user experience of why, the profession, sort of spoke to me, but also I just like the idea of being in a quiet place and, there's that typical, librarian picture that we have among many, which is just this person with the glasses on the end of the nose shushing people. So I joke about that a lot. But there's something, I always feel, and everybody has a different work style, but I always felt more productive in a quiet space where I could gather my thoughts, take breaks, and just kind of hunker down and do the work that I need to do. And libraries were a place that had just through my life been, a sort of a solace and a refuge in that way. So that was another thing that had really appealed to me. And part of what I ended up exploring in divinity school was this idea of silence and how it plays a role in many, many different traditions, and it's got a positive quality, it's got negative qualities. I focused on natural quiet places, so nature and things that are places that are free of, anthropogenic noises like planes, trains, automobiles, that kind of thing, and the physiological and psychological effects and positive qualities that they have for us, the positive effects. And then also I looked at monasteries as people who keep a different kind of silence, and most of it has to do with speaking and the sonic quality of the environment, what they're singing, when they talk, how they talk, all these kinds of things. And so just looking at when you've got an environment potentially like a library or like a place that has a sort of respect for and tradition with this kind of quiet ambient space, and what that actually means for our experience when patrons go there, when, why we seek it out. And it's interesting because we have a really wonderful, I think, initiative and move in the last, decade and a half in libraries to think about collaboration and community space, and we want activity in our libraries, and we don't want to just be this little silo where everybody's shushing each other. But I also see the value in it, and I really wanted to explore that, not just in my studies that I was doing as a user researcher in the library, but also in my studies and where quiet and silence comes into play in other aspects, in other areas, and where that might land in libraries.
And then where does sound art fit into this? Because, you know that I also have an interest and a background in sound art. And for me, it's always been a noisier thing. It's been about the presence of some sort of sound that you cannot ignore. And sound art for you seems to almost be the opposite, and not so much the absence of sound, but it's just a very different, like the opposite spectrum of what sound art is. Can you talk a little bit about what about sound art you like, and what kind of sound art you like and are creating?
Sure. So I think the lineage that really captured me was the lineage of acoustic ecology. So it's it's not silence as, being 0 decibels, because there really is no place where there are no 0 decibel places on Earth. I mean, if you have an atmosphere and you have an environment, sounds are going to happen. But what I'm talking about a little more is this place either free of anthropogenic sound, and then once that's missing, once we don't have our subjectivities filtering out all the noise that's around us in our daily lives, what are the sounds that then begin to emerge that we might not have noticed before? And these can be recordings of nature, and whether it's creeks or birds or whatever the acoustics are of that environment, and you begin to listen in a different way and embody the space in a different way. And so when you look at silence, it's not an absence of sound, it's this space that has a sonic quality when you remove certain aspects of our, let's say, either urban environments or our day-to-day chatter, our movement, our motion. In a monastery, this is diminished speaking. So when you have less speaking and when you have the acoustics of a space a certain way, what kind of sounds start to resonate, and how does singing happen, and how do the bells sound, and how do these tones happen? So it's kind of like what you're saying, where it's about bringing out different oral qualities, but it goes about it in sort of a way that addresses our subjectivities and how our subjectivities filter a lot of the sounds that, even though we're not conscious of, are there and might be playing with other sounds that are in our acoustic environment. So that's kind of I feel like I'm going back to my master's program with that answer, but that's essentially where that difference is. So there's certainly acoustics and sounds, but it's from that acoustic ecology point of view.
Do you leave the sounds alone, or do you try and do something with them? Or is it just the sound as it is, that you're listening to, or do you manipulate them at all?
I tend to do field recording with no layers on top of that. I will manipulate and do a little bit with it, but I won't add layers onto it. But there are plenty of people who take field recordings and then add all sorts of really anything, instruments, create, generated sounds, engineered sounds, all sorts of things. But my work is basically, I find, for me, it's just an artistic choice. I find enough music in the space.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I really like to hear. And I'm very glad for people to do more with it. But for me, it's the sonic quality of the space as best as I can capture it with the technology.
And is the work that you're doing in Rome then, I mean, I know that it includes video, but is there a huge focus on the sound part of it, the sound art part of it?
Yeah. Well, for example, there's lots and lots of churches here in Rome, and almost all of them have these beautiful bells. So I do my best to not just get an isolated experience of the bell, but I want to get the whole place, right? I mean, Rome is a sound bustling with all sorts of activity. So what does it sound like when you're outside the church, walking in? What does it sound like from the interior of the church? And just get a different sense of what the actual atmosphere is like. And then VR is a whole other challenge because you've got 360 video, but the challenge of creating an immersive audio experience is large. It's really it's difficult. So that's some of what I'm trying to work on here as well. There's a lot of work that's done with stereo, ambisonics. That the ambisonics is sort of a direction that it's going, but it's about how do we capture that. And it's interesting because there's a lot of technology that's being made, but it's still on the consumer level, it's not quite there yet. So we're trying to work with as best we can, getting that immersive audio as close to that video is right now.
So is there an academic article in the works on this? Because it sounds like it would make a good one.
Well, there's actually, there was a presentation by I can share the poster on this, by the Psychometric Society. There was a neuroscientist that I collaborated with on a VR project doing guided breathing meditations in VR, and we used biorespiratory feedback. So as your chest rises and falls, that's how the breath is measured, and then that's visualized by light that comes in and out of your mouth. So the question is, yeah.
That's amazing.
So yeah, I thought so. So the question is, and we were measuring things like, brain waves and pulse and skin and all these things to see what, now the neuroscientist did this, not me, but the question was, what's going to induce the most relaxed state in an experience like that? Is it what I described, being able to have your breath visualized as it happens? Or is it like a canned breath, like a pace that you don't set, that's in the experience, that just happens and you follow it? Or is it nothing? Is it nothing? And it turns out that actually the most relaxed state is not the live breath, which is the most, I think, exciting. It's actually the predetermined breath, no matter what your pace is, because people tend to match that. So all of your measurements that we were able to quantify basically showed that it's a bit counterintuitive, and it's a bit it's new research in terms of most folks tend to assume that live visualization is the way to go, but it turns out we need to think about it more because the neuroscientist found something different. So
yeah, actually
that's one thing to look at. Yeah, go ahead.
That makes a lot of sense to me, because whenever I am meditating, if I can be listening to some music or something that has a distinct rhythm that I can match my breath to, I find that I can get into a space that I want to be in much sooner. So especially if the purpose is for people to experience it, but also learn, and especially people trying meditation, like, I don't know what I'm doing, I think that something like that would be extremely helpful from an educational point of view, and encouraging people to try meditation.
And thank you, Jamie. I would be really curious to hear from folks who are listening, thinking about it from an information perspective. How might we think about when now that we're creating these experiences, right? How might so Harvard Libraries was working with a VR specialist to bring in a bunch of experiences. And we could look at them as media, but I would be interested to think about how we might bring these into a collection, how we might catalog them, how we might, right? So if I'm looking for a guided meditation, or if I'm looking for any kind of certain experience that I want in VR, how would we think about actually tagging these, well, I use the word tagging, that's probably not the right word to use, but what would the metadata be? I mean, are we just going to fit this into video? I mean, are we going to go Dublin Core on this? What are we going to do? And there's so many interesting aspects to VR that they started. I remember reading an article way back when Second Life was all the rage, and there was a question about how do we catalog all of the objects that are in this world, or how do we think about doing that? And I think VR is going to bring that question all full circle. And I'd be really curious if folks have any experience or thoughts on that, because I think that's going to be a powerful add for us to bring to that space. The same way that music has been overtaken with certain sort of metadata forms, and a lot of media where we should be as librarians and as information specialists. And just to think about that for this emerging form, I think would be really interesting.
Yeah, so anyone who wants to start that conversation in chat, please go ahead. I just have 2 more questions for you, which really just wrap up a lot of what we've been talking about. So everything that you've been sharing with us today has already from the beginning been outside of the traditional realm of librarianship, definitely falling into the special libraries, categories. But do you, in your work now, do you still consider yourself a librarian?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I knew it was coming too.
Of course.
I think the most useful way that I like to look at it is, I like to surf, and I have multiple surfboards, and one of them I think you could call a librarian. But for me, I think the most interesting thing that I found working in different spaces, now that I've had the opportunity to work in corporate, academic, and startup life, is it's always interesting to see, even if I have the same role or I'm doing the same work, if I introduce myself as a librarian versus if I introduce myself as an analyst, or I'm in analytics, or I'm in user research, it's just fascinating to watch the difference that happens in the meeting that we might be having, or the conversation, or whatever it is. So I like to have that librarian hat, especially when there are people who have that huge positive, strong reaction. They've had a great experience with a research librarian, so I play the library card right away. But I also find that being a librarian gives me opportunities in spaces that might not be considered traditional libraries. So for example, I love to curate these experiences, as I was describing. So I find that, that's sort of, part of like outreach, reference, also thinking about how to curate. This is something that as a librarian I bring with me everywhere. So whether in that moment I'm, an IT technical specialist, or an analyst, or a librarian, I think it becomes this really interesting mix of, you just pull out of the hat what skills you have in the moment. And I think library skills are fluid in that way in some respects. And so I'm really grateful to have that, as sort of a background and a skill set. But if I were to have a business card, I think it would be on there. I really like user experience research librarian, because that adds a layer to what research means, what user means, and what experience means. We're out of the realm of just products potentially, and the traditional design space, and now we're in information and other exciting places. So yeah, I would say librarian is in the mix, and I would also be very curious to how other folks respond to that, whether they like to rebrand themselves, or whether they like calling themselves librarian, or has that retained meaning for them. I love that question, so thank you.
That's an excellent topic for another interview, webinar, panel sort of thing. Like, what is a librarian? How do you define librarianship? Yeah, really, really interesting. Thank you for that answer. And so you have recently, obtained your Master's of Divinity. So you are a Master of Divinity, which every time I say that, I think Masters of the Universe, and I'm like, I have the power. Master of Divinity. What is next for you? What do you foresee happening, and what do you want to happen in your life now?
Another great question. The both degrees really opened up a lot for me, and I am very fortunate to have connected with some fantastic artists while I was at Divinity School, some renowned writers and photographers, and oh, it says my internet connection is unstable. Can you hear me?
It's been going in and out, but that's okay. We can
In and out, yeah. Okay. Well, I'll be brief. I mean, I went in thinking about being a theological librarian to Divinity School. I am now out thinking a lot about, which I never would have, sound art, art projects, museum installations, basically creating content in sound art and VR, and some very interesting opportunities in Utah, the Pacific Northwest, natural places, Bears Ears National Park, Grand Staircase Escalante, and funding these in a whole new model for me, which is grants and fellowships and these kinds of things, which is a really something I would not have considered prior to Divinity School. And then the other side of that is continuing the user research space and how I can keep in touch with libraries and all the work that we've talked about. I really feel a strong connection for that. So my immediate future is about, like this time in Rome, is about juggling all these skills, finding those sweet spots of sort of a collaborative set of different possibilities that I can kind of merge into one thing. As I move forward, I just have these, I have the headwind sort of behind me in a number of projects that are art projects that are very unique that I, again, would not have had the opportunity to. Sound art, VR, and information and user research are essentially my next steps.
That sounds fascinating and fun and very interesting, and I can't wait to see what happens next. One suggestion: when you have your website now, if you could put like where you are and what you're doing, like a little little widget that's like where's Tim now and what is he working on? That would be really cool. I'd love to know that. Especially if you're going to end up.
Waldo?
Yeah, well, yeah. Currently in Rome, next stop Utah. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us from across the globe and sharing your experiences. It's 9:45 now, and Tim has said that he will answer questions and just stay and chat about anything. I know that, so another plug for SLA is that, sorry, I'm going to keep doing this because, it's all about SLA. So, you and I met through SLA, and there are several people in this chat now who are personal friends of both of ours that, and one of the things I just wanted to say is beyond this amazing network is lifelong friendships, personal and professional friendships. So I know that some of us were hoping to, turn on video and audio and have a little chat, just like a much more informal chat. Everybody is welcome to stay and participate. And I don't know, hopefully we won't crash the system if everyone's got their video and audio on.
And by the way, Jamie, thank
Yes.
you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, and I would be curious for the folks out there, if you've got any sort of stories about UX design, VR, anything that for the community just would be a share. It doesn't necessarily have to be a question, but these are spaces I think we, as librarians and information professionals, we should be there. So let's take that opportunity. It doesn't have to be a question. It just could be something that you'd like to add.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you.
Yeah.
And it's funny that you went to Divinity School and developed this interest in sound art and just art and how to align these different interests. And then I went to art school and I have those interests too, but they're just like from a totally different different angle of how we approach it. But yeah. I love the shared aesthetic and the shared appreciation for it. Is it just a group of introverts? Nobody wants to see themselves on video?
They're all practicing silence, just like you said.
Oh, yeah. Maybe we should do something like that. When you were talking, I could hear in the background some children and some a few other sounds. Mm-hmm. Can you show us what's outside your window?
Oh, sure. So I'm actually.
Yeah.
I'm on the deck now, so everybody can see. Yeah, that's fine. We can take a little tour. So this is our little, we call this Happy Terrace.
Nice.
So you can see, a little Roman background. And there's a church that's over that way. And you may have heard the bells, but yeah, it's just a beautiful sort of space just outside of Rome that, yeah. So it's a little VR experience. We're giving you 360 video. Yeah.
And is that how you film when you're filming?
I see. Hold on.
Anne has joined us. Anne is a member of the San Diego chapter.
Yes, P. That's exactly what we do.
Really? So is a camera, does it stay stationary, and is it a 360 camera, or do you actually do the rotation?
Oh, you mean what I just showed you was, that was just my laptop. Yeah, it was not a 360 camera. Yeah.
But you use 360 cameras.
Yes. We use the GoPro Omni, and and Ambio mics for the sound. And just another plug for SLA, like you mentioned at the beginning when we first met, and I see Scott Brown is on there, and that was the panel. It was a panel that Scott and I think were hosting, and I think it was about career, but I can't remember precisely. And then he came up and chatted with us afterwards, and then we all were at Qualcomm. So
yeah, it was non-traditional career paths, which I think you have embodied completely. And at that point, I think you were still finishing your master's degree.
Right.
And I don't. Oh, okay. And then I remember also seeing you at the conference and talking to you then. Okay, so we have a participant named B. Bornheimer who has a question. So when in Rome, do you actually do as Romans do?
The answer is yes. We eat lots of mozzarella and we take siestas. It's terrific.
Siestas? I thought that was what the Spanish do.
Oh no, they're alive and well here.
Ah, very nice.
Oh, so I see Ann Hall is
at the BART station.
Yep.
So not a silent space, a very noisy space with a lot of ambient noise going, or not so much ambient as a lot of just what would you call it, Tim? What kind of noise?
That's the anthropogenic, right? That's human technological planes, trains, and automobiles. Yeah. And do you want to tell us? I mean, just because nobody seems to be talking, do you want to tell us about the volcano recording? Did you go to Hawaii and you made the recording of Haleakala? Oh, so that's an interesting story. It wasn't actually me. It was Gordon Hempton, who is an acoustic ecologist, well known. He went and recorded. He's recorded all over the world, but he went and recorded it when it was at a state. I think it was just I want to say around 5 decibels, so really, really minimal sound. And what's interesting about it is there's not a lot of acoustic, sounds that we're familiar with, but there's just this interesting experience of an acoustic presence of the space. That's the best way I can describe it when you listen to the recording. So as part of my thesis, I was hoping to get there. I didn't. I ended up spending an extended period of time in this place called 1 Square Inch of Silence in Olympic National Park up in Washington. So that's where one of my research sites where I focused. But yeah, I really want to go to Haleakala. Gordon basically says, the recording is one thing, but the experience of being there is entirely something else, because you've got that acoustic experience, and then at night, a completely, absolutely pristine sky to look at that is just filled with stars. So it's one of the few untouched spaces in terms of that kind of experience that are left. So any adventurers out there, definitely check it out, Haleakala. Sounds
amazing. I'm going to stop the recording just so that everybody, our official chat is over. But again, let's feel free to stay, and if you do stay, please join in on the conversation.